Aloha, welcome to another episode of Love What with Audrey Weilai, where I ask my friends and mentors what non romantic love is. And today we have my favorite sculptor, Gar Waterman. Hi, Gar.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I think I probably crossed your radar screen because I did a wonderful artist residency on Maui a couple years ago at
Mhm.
the Hui, and that was just a great trip working with local school kids and carving one of my favorite subjects, which is the elusive nudibranch, the sea slug. Mm. As I like to tell people, I am the world's greatest nudibranch sculptor in stone. I'm the only one who carves.
We first met at one of your gallery openings in Princeton. Stan invited me, and I was like, what? And that's when I first saw your work. It was, yeah, around 2010.
So a while ago, yeah,
It was a pleasure to see your work in person and also meeting you and your lovely family.
fantastic. Well, yeah, the old man was still, see, 2010, and he was
Mhm.
still pretty spry then.
What would you like to talk more about your work before I ask anything about Stan? Because I'm really curious about your upbringing and also the creative process.
The two were very much linked, of course. Growing up with a father who was an underwater filmmaker, it was not typical. And as I have a brother and a sister, and all of us were taken at various times by my father with him on expeditions, on film jobs, as we all grew up. That all had a very profound influence on us.
Mm.
Out in different ways. My brother became a cameraman, not necessarily underwater. There was certainly a very creative side to that. My sister is a wonderful artist as well. She does a lot of great marine stuff. I, of course, ended up becoming the world's greatest nudibranch sculptor. I often go back to the marine environment, that sort of grace and beauty that things underwater have. It finds its way into my work even when I'm not carving a fish. Something about the underwater world is a very powerful visual. My dad had a great influence on all of us.
You grew up in, or at least spent time in Tahiti, and then later on in Italy. Is it Pietra Santa?
Pietrasanta, yeah, sort of a watershed year for all of us was the year that
Okay.
my dad took us to Tahiti. I was very young. I was 9. That was a full year in the islands when he made a wonderful film out of that. Really one of his most popular films came out of that experience that also left an indelible impression on all of us living both the exotic climate, and certainly for me that was my first real diving was in Tahiti.
How old were you that you first dove?
I was 9 years old when we went to Tahiti.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And they had equipments for 9-year-olds back then already?
We brought our own gear. My dad had arranged to have equipment. He had a thing going with U.S. divers at that time, 1964. And so we brought our own tanks and had our own air compressor. Boston Whaler, the boat company, gave him a boat in return. He took some wonderful pictures of the boat there that they used in their catalog the next year.
Well, that's a fantastic trade.
Yeah, so we had the gear. That was all set through my dad, and we did a lot of diving. I think my brother and sister might have put a bottle on before that year, but that was my first time diving was that trip.
Do you remember what it was like to dive the first time?
I do. In fact, one of our very early dives, maybe even the first one, I couldn't tell you for sure, but there's a scene in the movie that he made about that year.
What was the name of the movie? I don't think I've seen it.
It was called The Call of the Running Tide. There was a version of it. National Geographic bought the film and took us back
Wow.
and did what one of their first hour specials on TV about that.
Mm,
And you can find that on YouTube. It's called
okay.
it's called Polynesian Adventure. It's very
Right.
dated,
Okay.
and sort of funny to see now, but it's certainly a piece of our history.
Mm,
But the first dive that we did was on a sunken flying boat that was in the lagoon, and the old man
wow.
had us climb into the airplane with
Okay.
canvas bags. He filmed us coming out of the airplane pulling these canvas bags, and his voiceover for the film said we got into diving early after our arrival flight overshot the runway, and with, with his sense of humor. 1964 and 5, there was no PADI, there was no NAWI, there was
Mm,
no rules for diving, and the old man basically just he put bottles on our back and he said, "Yeah, you breathe and don't stay down too long or go too deep, and you're fine." That's how we all learned to dive.
Do you remember what you saw in the ocean during that dive, or it was just that pure excitement of being underwater for the first time at age 9?
I can't give you specifics. The reefs were much more intact back then than they are today.
Mhm.
Like most places in the world, there was just a lot more marine life. We used to dive a lot outside the reef with
Sure.
because the water was clear. Yeah, we had some amazing experiences. Did the pass in Rangiroa. We lived for a couple months on Taha with a fisherman's family.
My goodness.
There was just, there were a lot more fish back then.
And why nudibranchs and why stone? Because you spent a huge amount of time studying stone carving, and that's where Italy comes in.
I graduated from college with a French degree, in part because of Tahiti. I sort of had an ear for it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what else to major in when I was in college. I eventually realized that I was addicted to making things. I'm
Mm,
a total addict to making things with my hands. That led me to take a chance and go to Italy in the early 90s, where I ended up
yeah.
living and working for about 7 years on and off. And that's where I learned how to carve stone. And the sea slug thing, it came out of a fundraiser initially that we did for a very interesting guy who was a MacArthur Fellow. He was actually a lobster
Okay.
fisherman in Maine,
Oh,
and a guy named Ted Ames. And Ted was trying to teach the lobster fishermen how to sustainably harvest, which was a very difficult
mm,
thing for all kinds of reasons. He's a brilliant
yeah.
guy, and we did a little fundraiser at the gallery for his organization. And for that show, I carved a bunch of my usual marine suspects,
Mm,
generally tends more towards fish and squid and
yeah.
starfish. I've always loved nudibranchs. And part of what I ended up doing diving with my dad and my brother and my sister and I, diving for us was and remains sort of a mission-based pastime because all of our diving
Mm,
experience was with our father growing up,
yes.
and with him the thing was to get the shot. So a
Yeah.
dive was not necessarily to just see what's there. It was very organized. Okay, we're diving
Mm,
here because we need this shot. So sometimes when we couldn't get our shot, how you go to look for manta rays to get your image and the rays
yes.
don't show up. What I loved to do was just to settle on the bottom and look at the tiny creatures.
Okay.
So for me, it was a way to kind of make it a dive that wasn't successful in the film side,
Mm,
more interesting. And of course, when you start to look at all the tiny creatures, there's a whole nother world there outside of the big ones, the sharks and the dolphins and the whales that get people's
of
attention.
course.
The nudibranchs are some of the most wonderful, biodiverse, bizarre, strange little beasties that you can find underwater.
They are.
And in my years in Italy, I was overwhelmed and fell in love with all the different kinds of stone that were available there because
Mm,
the Carrara area in the little town where I was, they not only had all the indigenous stone from the Italian
Yeah.
Alps there, your classic white Carrara marble, but they imported
Right.
stone from all over the world.
Wow.
You had access to this incredible rainbow of different colored materials. Probably in part the whole thing of the whole sea slug thing came out because I sort of got a kick out of using these different stones together as a way of representing uh, nudibranchs. My idea is never to carve an exact model of a sea slug.
Of
There's no
course.
point in that. The
Yes.
actual creatures are more colorful and more amazing than anything I could ever produce. But
Mm.
I try to imply a little level of those amazing colors and whatnot.
Do you start with a photo or sketch? Because you can't just dive right in and start carving because that's not practical, right?
I typically start with the piece of stone
Okay.
because when I buy my stone in Italy, I get odd shaped pieces. I don't buy, a perfectly square rectangular block. I shop,
Mm.
I'm a dumpster diver over there, and the marble
Okay.
yards are full of offcuts from other jobs.
Mm.
I look for unusually shaped pieces, and then I kind of have a parameter into which I need to fit something. So all of my work
Yes.
in part begins with the actual piece of stone. And of course,
Mm.
if I'm stuck on a theme like sea slugs, I'll look for a piece of stone that I can fit a nudibranch into. Then I'll sketch on the piece of stone, a rough sketch, and then begin to rough it out. And sometimes the shape will change a little bit as I get into the material. Sometimes there's a fault that I
Okay.
didn't see. Stone carving has its own rhythm to it. And fortunately, because I'm not doing like a human figure where I got to get the nose and the face properly positioned and pretty close to how it should be, I can get away with a lot more freedom. But of course, doing sea slugs, especially if you're doing some of the elid variety, which I'd kind of like to do, that have all the serrata,
Mm.
all these bizarre shaped serrata down their backs. It
Oh,
becomes very labor intensive. So
I'm sure. And
yeah,
they seem really fragile as well.
they are fragile. Stone is funny. It's pretty
Mm.
strong and obviously very quite hard, but very vulnerable to being hit.
Mm.
Because it will bruise or break easily, and especially with these appendages that I will add on to some of
Yeah.
the bodies of the slugs. So they have to be moved carefully. They evolved into my interest in this whole art science thing, where I use the sculpture as an engagement tool in the biology of the creature. The sea slugs have been wonderful for that. So far, I've had one show with the nudibranchs at the Norwalk Maritime Aquarium in Connecticut, my home state, that ran for
Yes.
2 years. It was a wonderful exhibit.
3 years. Oh my goodness.
2 years. It had a 2 year
Yeah.
run, very nice 2 year run, and I'm looking for the next institution to host that show or another.
Mm.
That's kind
Wow.
of a direction that I'm very interested in.
And you did residency in Maui, right? I remember you sharing pictures that children did of the nudibranchs, and they were just wonderful in Maui.
Yeah, that was really fun. The best part of that was working with the kids. Nudibranchs are a great subject for doing art things with kids because almost anything goes. There's a sea slug that could look like almost anything the kids could come up with.
Yes.
They weren't intimidated. The less artistically inclined kids weren't put off because they weren't having to
Mm.
draw a perfect person.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really fun. A show at the end of that residency at the Hui, they have a nice gallery space, and I had all the kids' artwork up on the wall behind a 4.5 foot Elid nudibranch that I had carved out of Hawaiian woods,
Mm.
5 different kinds of
Yeah.
woods from the island.
And for working with wood, do they need to be fully dry, or how's that process?
I worked with a mix of woods there. Some of it was dry, some of it was green. The body of that particular sculpture was a koa log that was in the yard of an old friend of mine who lives on Maui. He volunteered it for me, but I hollowed it out so it wouldn't split quite as much.
Okay.
I wonder what it looks like now. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
whatever was going to happen with it was going to happen.
And you have wonderful sculptures of different insects. And is it farrow seeds that you're interested in as well?
Feral, yes, I call them feral in the sense that, they were domestic but now gone wild. The idea is that you don't know what they're going to become, and that's part of why seed forms fascinate me, because a seed is this incredible tiny little blueprint of some plant form. A great example is you think of an acorn. If you didn't know that
Mm,
enormous oak tree could grow out of an acorn, you would never imagine that such a thing was possible. So there's
mm,
that's kind of mystery of seeds I find intriguing. I do a lot of seeds. My insects are mostly from recycled metal. These are all
yeah.
forms in nature. Totally, totally intrigued with form in nature. It's a rabbit hole that you can go down any one of a million rabbit holes, and they're all
Mm,
super fascinating. The whole art science thing evolved out of looking for a way to leverage my artwork to make people more aware of just how
mm,
extraordinary some of these bits of biodiversity are, especially in the
right.
face of how much of it we are losing today. I'd like to think
Mm,
that it's a way of giving my work a little more relevance rather than just making
yes.
a art object.
So it's a way of educating and also opening up a conversation of what we need to be doing to help conserve nature and do
Absolutely.
our part.
Absolutely. Yes, that is the hope. Yes.
That's a really wonderful way.
There are a number of artists doing fabulous stuff in this arena. Art can be in conjunction with science. Art can be this wonderful gateway into it, because most people, unless they're particularly interested in a subject, you start lecturing them with the science, and they can lose interest. Art can give it a context and an entry point that can allow for a more effective engagement tool than either might be able to do on their own. And
Mm,
one of the exhibits that I did that kind of started me on this whole kick was with Yale University's Peabody Museum of Natural History. And it took me 10 years of going to the entomologist lunch at the Peabody
mm,
Museum, where I got to know the entomologists, and I started bringing in my metal insects. And eventually I collaborated with them on what was a wonderful show about beetles.
yeah.
What their exhibit designer did in this show, which was so effective, was the exhibit had my metal beetles. It had actual specimens of beetles there, and then it had
Okay.
big blown up images, focus stacked images of beetles on the wall. But what she did
Wow.
oh, it was a gorgeous exhibit. Yale University has the best of the best. But what she did that was so unique, and what I sort of observed to be so effective, was in the display, she photographed, uh, for example, the foot of one of my beetle sculptures, and that was right
Yes.
there. The sculpture was there, but she photographed the foot, and then she had a photograph of an actual beetle foot, and she put the two
Yes.
together in a little graphic display with the scientific information, so that she basically arranged for the viewer this conversation between my interpretation of this little anatomical detail and what it looked
Yes.
like on the real creature. That back and forth, especially for kids, was incredibly effective, because I
Mm,
went down there when the show was up and watched these school groups come through with kids.
mm,
That was an eye opener as to how the art can help kind of grab people's attention and impart at least a little bit of biology.
So would you say that gives you even more satisfaction other than creating beautiful forms?
A different kind of satisfaction. As I said, I'm addicted to making things, and I love making the sculpture. But I'm also I love finding a path for it to go beyond just having somebody buy it and stick it in their house. For all of us artists who are inspired by nature, we kind
Mm,
of owe it to what inspires us to do something to
of
try to
course.
preserve it. Many underwater artists, of course, do this because
Mm,
all of us who are familiar with the underwater world are horrified at the trajectory of the oceans.
of course.
Many artists try to find some sort of environmental message with their work, which is a great thing. And so I'm kind of adding my little voice to that whole thing.
I think it's a huge voice. Mm. I'm curious for you what love means aside from romantic love.
Well, I would say that nature is my God, if you will. I am
Mm,
not religious at all. We were not
yeah.
raised with any faith in our family. The more I learn about nature and the breadth of just the life forms on our own little planet, let alone the staggering pictures that that new telescope is bringing back
Mm,
from Chile. The universe is an amazing thing, and the life forms on this on our own little planet here are, as I say, an endless, wonderful rabbit hole to go down. And I now understand how somebody can spend their entire life studying the wasps that live in figs that fertilize.
mm,
So love for me would be more sort of amazement and respect for the complexity of life. I scratch the surface with my own homage to that with my work. I love seeing what other artists do. One of the guys that I collaborated with to do a show at my alma mater some years ago is an English photographer named Rob Kessler. And Rob
mm.
photographs seeds with an electron scanning microscope. So,
Wait, how does that even work? I don't understand. I understand what you said in the individual words, but when you strung them together, I didn't get it.
well, he puts a seed, sometimes
Yes.
a seed that's so tiny you can barely see it with the human eye.
Yeah.
He'll he'll put that under an electron scanning microscope. He will photograph that image, which is black and white because, of course,
Okay.
an electron scanning microscope image is not actually a photograph. It is
Mm,
a scan that bounces electrons off of an object and then
yeah.
creates an image from that. So he'll take that image and colorize it, super enlarge it. Are you familiar with Levon Biss? Does that name ring a bell?
No, who's Levon Biz?
So Levon Biss is actually another Englishman who has had a very successful exhibit called Microsculpture. And Levon does
Yeah.
focus stacked images of insects, but then
Mm.
blows them up to like a 10-foot tall image. Every
What?
every hair on the leg, every pore on the side of the insect is perfect because he shoots with an incredibly powerful camera and does thousands of individual shots that then he collates into a single image and prints them in these gorgeous giant prints. And that show has been traveling around. And so, like Rob Kessler, he's taking uh, um, a tiny piece of the natural world, which you could easily overlook because unless you look at it with a microscope, you're not going to see these incredible textures and landscapes that are there. People like that, I love what they're doing. They open up this a whole nother world, and a world that
Mm,
kind of used to be the purview just of scientists. Now with digital photography and whatnot, it's much more available to the rest of us. And in fact,
mm.
that brings You asked me about where I get my sea slug images. I get them all from the internet and some of these fabulous nudibranch sites for other crazies who are obsessed with sea slugs are just fantastic.
I remember doing muck diving for the first time in February. I can't believe I waited this long to do one. There were a lot of creatures I couldn't see unless I borrowed someone's magnifying glass underwater. When we went back to the surface, the photographers showed us images that usually was better than what I could see with my own eyes through the
Yes.
magnifying glass.
Yep. So, were you in the Lemba Straits?
I was. Yeah, I was so excited. It was
That's
also recommended by your father. Um, Socorro was one and Limbe was one.
yeah. Yeah, the
Yeah.
I haven't been there yet. I'd love to go. What looks from 10 feet away like a barren, muddy bottom is full of incredible creatures. Fantastic. What fun. That's so great that you got a chance to dive there.
I felt conflicted because with the bigger creatures like dolphins and mantas, of course they can swim away if humans are being too close to them. However, with muck diving, I felt I was invading their home in some ways because it involved turning things over and really look closely, like looking at a sea cucumber's anus to find the little shrimp, for example, and they couldn't get away easily, or looking at a pygmy seahorse that's pregnant. Photographers line up and they wanted to use flash. I wonder what your view is on that.
Well, of course, yes, in its extreme that, dive sites that are overrun with people, terrorizing the poor inhabitants of the dive sites is certainly a
Yeah.
problem. I mean, the Lamba Straits, it's a pretty big area, if I'm not
Mm,
mistaken. So probably
yes.
the impact isn't too terrible. And while you
Mm.
might cause a nightmare or two amongst the tiny shrimp, they probably get on with their day once you're gone.
Oh, I feel more relieved. You've been to Socorro years ago, right? I finally was able to do that, and the manta rays made a huge impression on me. Of course, it was through Stan's book that I first learned about mantas, and I fell in love with them. How was
Well,
it for you?
oh my God. Well, Socorro, my trip to Socorro with my dad was during the filming for the thing Discovery Channel did on him some years ago. And Peter Benchley was along, an old friend of my dad's. He was a wonderful guy. It was on that trip that the three of us got to take a little ride on the back of one of those fabulous creatures.
He mentioned one with Michelle and Richard Hall, but what about your story?
Howard Hall was there, actually. Howard was filming for that job. And of course, years before, my brother had cut quite a swath riding the back of that manta in the Sea of Cortez, where he was holding on to the two remoras like handlebars.
Mm,
That
mm,
was actually a Howard Hall picture as well. But
okay.
my own experience was just manta. Well, you remember you've been there. The mantas come along and they're kind of curious.
Yes, yes.
We'd sort of learned that you can take them for a ride if you sort of swim up and rub their stomachs, and I guess they kind of think you're a cleaner fish because
Okay.
they slow down a bit, and then you swim like hell up behind them and climb on and you hang on over the top of their mouth,
Okay.
and if they don't want you there, they could
Mm,
shrug you off in a moment and be gone. I think that they think you're a cleaning fish. So I had this incredible ride on the back of that manta. Must have been a good 60 feet from wing to wing. And
mm.
what I won't ever forget, and you might remember this from your trip there were clouds of ash drifting through the water from the
Yes.
and so the water is super clear, but then there'd be
Mm,
these
mm.
clouds drifting through of ash, and in the background, I can still see this, and I'll never forget this dive. Looking towards one of the islands, it had that horizontal kind of perforated striations that the water, I guess, had eroded on the island.
Mm,
There were
yeah.
these clouds drifting through. There was another diver way over by the island. I don't know, 400 feet away, but it was so clear except for these drifting clouds. And there I was, on the back of this crazy manta ray. It was as close to a science fiction thing that as I've ever gotten. And then my dad and my
Mm,
sister joined me, and all three of us were taken for a ride by the ray. When we finally, I think we were running out of air, and we let go of the ray, and the ray kind of parked, and we returned to the Zodiac, and the ray came up and sort of hung out under the boat for a while, like, oh, that's it. And I know, of course, that it's politically incorrect to ride the manta rays, I suppose. You can't have everybody out there
mm,
clambering on them, but I will tell you,
no.
it's one of my cherished experiences with my dad over all the years and all the diving.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. When I went on the liveaboard, they specifically said on every single dive, no riding the mantas, no riding the mantas.
Well, I guess they have to do that. But we were there unchained by the dive boat, and so we took advantage of it. And I can only hope that they'll forgive me. The ray, I said the manta ray seemed to have a good time.
When it was beginning of 2024 and Stan passed away in August 2023, so I asked a friend of mine to make a little wooden manta with his name on it. On some dives in Socorro, I would take the manta with Stan's name on it, and I would ask if the mantas remembered him.
Well, who knows? I certainly hope that ray that we rode is still around.
Mm,
That would be wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a fabulous trip.
Mm, yeah. So, anything exciting you're working on?
Let's see. Well, I'm really putting most of my energies into trying to get these art science shows out into the world again in another form. It's not so easily done. Trying to find another institution that's willing to host them, even even though it's a wonderful idea, the pieces of the puzzle are there. It's had its proof of concept,
Yeah.
but there are always mitigating circumstances, whether it's different agendas of different institutions, politics, budgets, you name it. So that
Mm,
a lot of energy into that. Still making work in the studio when I can, working on this construction site up here in the Berkshires that we undertook, which we bit off a little more than we could chew. Neither my sister nor my brother nor I are big kind of pleasure divers. Diving for us was so indelibly ingrained as missions with the old man. That's kind of where they ended up sitting for us. So, but there are on my bucket list. I'd love to go to the Lemba Straits.
yeah.
I'd also love to see sperm whales sleeping,
Yes. Like upside down.
hanging in the.
How do they do that?
They hang with their tails down, and their flotation device, which is the spermaceti in their
Mm-hmm.
head, that they can achieve. They don't need a BC vest to achieve buoyancy, but those images that you see of them, like some bizarre forest,
Mm.
all sleeping together, I would die and don't go to heaven. What an extraordinary thing.
Where do people do that kind of dive? It would be in the open sea. How would you find them?
This is the issue, the challenge, of course, that you've got to be in the right place at the right times. In the Canary Islands, there are a lot of
Mm.
whales in that corner of the world, and I'm sure there's some other places there that sperm whales congregate, where if you're lucky and you're there, I think a lot of those pictures are taken by the dive guides who are there all the time. They actually have a chance of encountering that. Most of us who go somewhere to dive. It's a total crapshoot whether you're going to see that phenomena or not, whether it's sperm whales sleeping or whatever else you're looking for. You just got to hope that you get lucky. One of my trips with the old man was filming right whales down off the peninsula Valdez in Argentina. This was years ago, so early 80s. We almost got washed out. We would go out every day in Zodiacs and look for the whales and try to get in the water with them, but they
Mm.
want nothing to do with us.
So they would take off.
Yeah, they would mosey on in another direction.
Mm.
You know how it is with whales. If they don't want to hang out with you, they they don't. But we almost got shut out. But the last couple days we were there, for whatever reasons, we had a mother and a calf who came over and just hung out with us, and astonishing. So there's a good deal of luck involved and persistence, being able to be in a place for an extended period of time. So you improve your chances of seeing something that you're there to see.
This is my favorite part. I asked the guest to leave one question for me or the viewer to contemplate on. And do you have a question for us?
I would phrase a question more as much as an observation shared, that the joy and the pleasure of really studying some small facet of life that's in your backyard or something that interests you, whether it's flower or creature. Take a closer look, do a little research, and see, if you love roses, just as an example, take a look and see what artists or other people are doing with roses, and what is the hidden life
Mm.
of a hibiscus flower and the insects who pollinate it. Go down some of these rabbit holes, because you'll be astonished at what you can see, even if you're not a scientific oriented person, which I was not, but I've kind of become much more interested in the biology of these things that I sculpt, because of initially starting out just looking at their forms, but then learning more about their biology. It's a wonderful thing. That would be more my question slash suggest.
Thank you. And as we're wrapping up the conversation, is there anything else you would like to share, especially regarding conservation?
Only that I think so many of us feel like we're too small to do anything in the face of all of the terrible stuff that's being done. And this is nothing original at all about this, but just that, of course, every little bit and piece is important. And education and learning about the creatures that are at risk, and telling other people about them, sharing if you're interested, because the only way we're going to care about these little beasties like sea slugs. Who cares about sea slugs? Well,
I do.
yeah, they're all part of a bigger puzzle. Learn more about all of them, and that will guide people towards pushing other people to observe the world and care more about the other creatures who exist here with us.
If you could be an animal or plant or another form, what would you choose? Would it be a nudibranch or something else? Maybe not the entire life, maybe just for a day.
Just for a day. Well, what would I be? I don't know. Being a manta ray for a day wouldn't be a bad go. Barrel rolls and flying in the ocean. I got a little taste of that riding on the back of
Mm.
that creature, and I'd like to do that again.
Mm. Oh, that sounds so incredible. I'll
Yeah.
put the link to your website and Instagram in the show note. Is there any other way you would like people to find your work?
The website and the web is a great portable portfolio if anybody wants to see what I do.
Thank you so much again, Gar.
All right, Audrey, be well.
Aloha. Take care.
Okay, bye bye.